It's the Americans that are trying to stop the war, and Piers Morgan, Boris Johnson, and Keir Starmer who are trying to keep it going.
I don't want to keep it going.
A lot of Ukrainian,
I don't want to keep it going.
You've got a lot of Ukrainian blood on your hands. And now, having caused you and your war party the death of 1 million Ukrainians while claiming to love Ukrainians, you're now calling for British lives to be lost.
I'm not the biggest fan of George Galloway, but on this he is correct. Piers Morgan, Keir Starmer and the European governments are sanctimonious warmongers. And anytime anyone calls them out, they all parrot the same platitudinous slur that calling for an end to the war somehow makes you a Putin apologist. The era of reason is over. It appears Britain's liberal left want an all-out war against Russia. I've come to the conclusion political ideology has become the new religion, and the biggest fundamentalists of all are the liberal elites. Like any religious fundamentalists, they need an enemy. And that enemy is fascism. And that is why they need a holy crusade against Russia. To justify this righteous crusade, they have convinced themselves that Putin is Hitler and Russia is the Third Reich. These people hate Britain, its history and its culture. They want to get rid of our national borders and identity and become part of an authoritarian European state based on their progressive values. Many European leaders also share that belief. And all that is why these people care more about defending Ukraine's borders than they do Britain's. Listen to this moronic Labour MP's response.
Will that popular support hold when it's a matter of British people potentially dying to keep Ukrainian territory Ukrainian?
Right. This is a quote from Sergei Markov, a Russian political scientist, former close advisor and supporter of Vladimir Putin. He was asked about this peacekeeping force, boots on the ground, from both British and French troops, and his response was absolutely not. This shouldn't happen. If the British and French send us troops to Ukrainian territory, Russians will regard them as occupation troops and will kill every one of them.
Well, that is a totally unacceptable statement, isn't it? Saying that troops in Ukraine would be occupying, that is clearly...
It might be unacceptable, but it could be the reality.
Then it would be a pretext. It's false, but it's a pretext.
This is part of why the Prime Minister is right to say that the option of boots on the ground and planes in the sky is something that this country and allies across the West need to consider and need to consider carefully, because we have to make sure that we do defend our borders in Europe. If we don't do that, then bad things can happen, very bad things can happen.
But you know that some people would reply to that and say, why are we defending their borders when we don't defend our own? I mean, some people would say, look, you're making a choice here to spend a lot of money defending the sovereignty of Ukraine when Russia's attacks on it are immoral, but are not an immediate security threat to our country.
We know that when there is aggression or things like the attacks that Russia have made into Ukraine and other issues that happen in Europe, they often do wash up on our shores, both when it comes to our safety and security. And so we need to make sure that we protect and defend our borders. That's our borders of this country and also of the European Union and the EU.
Wow. See how he's more concerned with the borders of the European frontier than he is with Britain's borders? These are the fanatical morons running the country. These people hold the British public in contempt. They'll call them bigots and fascists when they show concern over Britain's national borders, but they will expect them to go die and fight to defend Ukraine's national borders. They are prepared to drag us kicking and screaming into a war with Russia.
And as you often do, by the way, woefully mischaracterising me as some kind of Starmer fanboy when I spent almost all of his tenure as Prime Minister hammering the guy. The only thing I've really agreed... the only thing I've agreed with is about Ukraine.
And Boris Johnson. You're a fanboy for him and Boris Johnson.
No. Don't misquote me. Don't misquote me. I am specific
of war in the Ukraine.
You're specifically on Ukraine, I agree with both Johnson and Starmer. That is true.
And how?
But that does not make me a fanboy for either of them. I have many things, I've hammered them over too. But on that point, you're wrong and they're right about Ukraine.
Well, you say that, but I'm on the same line as your friend Donald Trump and the American administration. And it's really come to something when, having spent a lifetime myself fighting against NATO and American wars, it's the Americans that are trying to stop the war, and Piers Morgan, Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer who are trying to keep it going.
I don't want to keep it going.
A lot of Ukrainian,
I don't want to keep it going.
You've got a lot of Ukrainian blood on your hands. You have lied about this war from the beginning.
Actually, Vladimir Putin has the blood on his hands of Ukrainians.
You can have a monologue if you like.
It was Vladimir Putin.
You can have a monologue if you like.
3 years ago.
Bring on a guest.
3 years
let
ago.
The guest speak.
3 years
let
ago.
The guest
If you're going to libel me,
if you're going to
libel me, I will hold you to account.
You have lied about the origin of this war, about the duration of this war, about the course of this war, and now having caused you and your war party the death of 1 million Ukrainians while claiming to love Ukrainians, you're now calling for British lives to be lost.
What a load of absolute bullshit.
That constitutes close to a war crime.
What
and
a
you
load.
are
You are
guilty
talking.
of it.
Listen. Get off your Putin fanboy hat for a moment.
Well, you see, there you go.
I'm going to respond in kind.
Reagan said.
I'm going to respond.
Anybody who disagrees with you
Can I respond,
is a Putin
please?
fanboy.
Can I respond,
Listen,
please?
Why don't you listen to Donald Trump?
Can I respond?
He told you yesterday.
Can I respond?
Can
I respond or not?
Donald Trump told you yesterday that joining Ukraine, forget about it. That's the cause of the war in the first place, which I've been telling you from the beginning.
Yeah, okay, let me respond if I may. Can I respond?
Sure, Piers.
Okay, Donald Trump, who I know well, I've been a friend of his for 20 years, good and bad. We've had some up times and bad. Spoke to him a few weeks ago. We had a great conversation. But he's absolutely wrong when he categorizes this as something that Ukraine started. Absolutely wrong to call Zelensky a dictator. The real dictator is Vladimir Putin. 3 years ago, he illegally invaded a sovereign democratic European country and started murdering with impunity Ukrainians. The Ukrainian people, to everyone's astonishment, managed to repel that early invasion by Russian forces and are still repelling them 3 years later. They've reached an impasse where there's been little movement on the battlefield now for many months, but hundreds of thousands on both sides are dying. It's back to World War I scale of losses, and it has to end. I want the war to end like Trump does. I don't like his categorization of Zelensky as a dictator. I don't like the way he's trying to make out that they started this war when it was Russia, but I do agree with him that we need to have peace, and I actually think he's inherited the situation, and I think his way to try and forge peace by doing a minerals deal with Ukraine, which should satisfy his critics back in, particularly the MAGA critics who don't like the way they've wasted, as they see it, all these billions on Ukraine. This way they can recoup that through the minerals. I think it's a smart business deal by Trump if that happens. I think there's a general acceptance. You have to have the war now frozen on current geographic lines so that Russia would keep the territory it's taken but not have sovereignty over that, and Ukraine can try and politically get back the territory later because it would retain sovereignty. We'll see if that ever happens. But don't, please, with a straight face, try and tell me that Russia did not start this war 3 years ago. I know the history. I know what happened. And I know all the background to this. But the idea this is somehow bloody Zelensky's fault and Ukraine's fault is an absolute joke.
Blimey, that was a long response, Piers. I hope I'll get as long to respond to your response without you interrupting me. You're going to regret it when very soon Zelensky is sitting in a beachfront villa somewhere counting his ill-gotten gains and all the secrets of the rampant corruption between the Democrats and the Zelensky regime begin to tumble out of the cupboard. This war did not begin 3 years ago. You very well know that it began in 2014. You very well know that it began with a coup against the elected president of Ukraine, backed by Victoria Nuland and the administration at that time, and supported by you. You very well know that the criminalization of the Russian language, which followed hard on the heels of that coup, was the proximate reason for an uprising in the east of the country amongst Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian people. You very well know that Zelensky and his predecessor rained down shot and shell on the people of East Ukraine for 8 years before Putin intervened in 2022, and that 14,000 people, most of them women and children, were killed in that onslaught. You very well know that Zelensky was preparing for a final onslaught, a final solution.